There was once a man who believed he was the best fighter in the entire town. He ran a dojo that stood right in the center of the city, a big glass front building with red mats and posters of him doing flying kicks. People came from nearby neighborhoods to train with him because he had a certain charm, the kind of confidence that made everyone believe he was unbeatable. But under that confidence lived something else, pride so big that it made him forget what martial arts truly stood for. He spent years building his reputation. Every photo on his dojo walls showed him in winning poses, trophies, certificates, and pictures from old tournaments where he had stood tall with medals around his neck. His students respected him, maybe even feared him a little. He demanded perfection in every move. Whenever a student made a small mistake, he would shout loudly, "You call that focus? A real fighter must never lose control." At first, people admired his discipline. Parents brought their children to learn self-defense, and adults joined to stay fit. But over time, some began to notice his attitude changing. He no longer spoke about self-control, balance, or humility. He bragged more about his power and strength. He would tell newcomers stories of how he could defeat anyone, even the most famous martial artists. One afternoon, during a crowded training session, he was showing off a new spinning kick. The room was hot and the sound of feet hitting mats echoed around. Some local reporters had come to film a short segment about his dojo. The cameras made him even more proud. He wanted to impress them. He kicked the pad again and shouted, "There isn't a man alive who can stand against my speed." Even those Hollywood fighters, and they wouldn't last 10 seconds. The students laughed nervously. One of them joked, "Even Chuck Norris?" The dojo master paused, smirking. "Chuck Norris?" he said loudly, turning to the crowd. "He's an actor. Maybe he can fight in movies, but not here in the real world. If he came here, I'd show him what a real master looks like." Everyone laughed. The reporters smiled, thinking he was joking, but the master wasn't. His tone was serious. He wanted everyone to know that he saw himself above the legends. The comment spread quickly through town. By the next morning, people were already talking about it. At the local diner, a group of men read the article in the newspaper. One of them, an older man with a white beard, chuckled quietly. He had served in the military years ago and had once trained at a camp where Chuck Norris had taught a seminar. He shook his head and said, "That man's about to learn a lesson he'll never forget." Back at the dojo, the master was proud that his words had gotten attention. His classes became even more full. He saw the curious faces and assumed people were coming to admire him. He didn't realize most of them came out of curiosity. They wanted to see the man who dared to challenge Chuck Norris. During training, he pushed his students harder. "Faster," he shouted. "If you want to be the best, you must act like the best." Confidence wins battles. He loved the sound of his own voice. His assistant instructor, a quiet young man who respected him deeply, finally said softly, "Sensei, maybe you shouldn't talk like that about others." "Chuck Norris is respected by many. It might not sound good," the master frowned. "Respect is earned, not given," he replied coldly. "When he walks into my dojo, then we'll see if he deserves it." Those words carried across the room. Everyone fell silent. Even the kids stopped moving. They could feel something heavy in the air, the kind of energy that came before a storm. Days passed and life went on as usual, but the talk never stopped. The town buzzed with excitement. Some joked that maybe Chuck Norris would show up to the dojo to prove a point. Others said he wouldn't care. But one thing was certain. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Then, one quiet afternoon when the sun was dipping low and painting the streets gold, the dojo door opened during a regular practice session. The sound of the doorbell caught everyone's attention. A man in a simple shirt and jeans stepped in. He looked older, calm, and kind. His hair had hints of gray, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. Nobody recognized him at first, at least not right away. The master saw him and asked, "Can I help you?" The man smiled. "I heard you're the best fighter in town," he said in a calm, friendly tone. "Mind if I watch your class?" The master smirked. "Of course. But I warn you, once you see what real fighting looks like, you might want to sign up yourself." The man nodded, still smiling, and walked to the back to sit quietly. He watched the class, studying how the students moved and how the instructor carried himself. His eyes were sharp but kind, like someone who had seen a lot but didn't need to prove anything anymore. During the lesson, the master performed his favorite demonstration, breaking boards with his hand and showing off spinning kicks. Each time he looked toward the man at the back, expecting applause. But the man only smiled politely and clapped gently, never overreacting. After the session ended, the master approached him and asked, "So, what do you think? Not bad, huh?" The man nodded. "You're strong, no doubt about that. But strength isn't everything." The master laughed loudly. "Oh, really? What do you know about strength?" The man looked at him quietly for a moment, then said softly, "Enough to know that true power doesn't need to shout." A few students nearby whispered among themselves, realizing who the man might be. One of them pulled out a phone and searched quickly, eyes widening. He whispered, "That's him. That's Chuck Norris." The words spread through the dojo like a spark through dry grass. Heads turned. A few gasps filled the room. The master blinked, thinking they were joking. He looked again, studying the man's face closely, and suddenly the smile faded from his lips. "Wait," he said slowly. You're really Chuck Norris?" Chuck nodded with that same calm smile. "I am. But don't worry, I didn't come here to embarrass you. I just happened to be nearby and heard about your dojo. Thought I'd stop by." The master's pride burned like fire. He laughed nervously. "Well, this is unexpected. Since you're here, maybe we should have a little friendly match. For fun." Chuck hesitated, then said, "If it's truly friendly, sure. No need for hard hits or ego, right?" The master waved his hand. "Of course. Just a demonstration. Let's show these students how real fighters move." The students gathered around in a circle. The mats squeaked under their feet as they made space. Some looked nervous, others excited. Phones were ready to record, though no one dared to say it out loud. As both men stepped onto the mat, the room went silent. The air felt thick, like time itself had slowed down. The master bounced lightly on his feet, showing off small kicks and fast hand moves. Chuck stood still, relaxed, his eyes steady. Inside, the master felt a mix of excitement and fear. He had dreamed of being noticed by legends, but not like this. Yet his pride wouldn't let him back down. He bowed quickly, and Chuck returned the gesture with respect. When they straightened up, the master charged forward with a loud yell, hoping to impress the crowd. Chuck didn't move much. He simply shifted his weight and sidestepped, guiding the man's motion with a gentle touch. The master stumbled but regained balance. He tried again, faster this time, but Chuck's calm was unshakable. At that moment, the master realized something strange. Chuck wasn't trying to fight him. He was showing him control, precision, and patience. There was no anger in his eyes, no sign of pride, and only understanding. The session ended when Chuck raised a hand and said softly, "That's enough for now. Thank you for the demonstration." The master nodded, catching his breath, his pride trembling but not yet broken. He smiled stiffly for his students, pretending it was just practice, but deep down, he felt something shift. Something small but powerful. That night, after everyone left, he sat alone on the mat. The lights reflected off the trophies on the wall, and for the first time, they didn't make him feel proud. They looked like reminders of how much he had chased glory instead of wisdom. He remembered Chuck's words. "True power doesn't need to shout." Those words echoed in his mind as he stared at the floor. Somewhere inside, he knew the next time he faced Chuck, he wouldn't mock him. He would listen. Because even though the real lesson hadn't fully happened yet, it had already begun the moment Chuck walked through that door. The next morning, the dojo master woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but his mind was already busy. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the day before. He had spent the whole night replaying every moment in his head. The quiet confidence on Chuck's face, the calm way he moved, the silence that filled the room when everyone realized who he was. For the first time in a long while, the master didn't feel like showing off. He just sat quietly on his bed, staring at his hands. They were strong hands, calloused from years of training and breaking boards, but they suddenly felt heavy, like they carried a weight he hadn't noticed before. He went to the dojo early, unlocking the door before the first student arrived. The air smelled of mats and old sweat, but it felt different today. The space was silent, almost peaceful. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the room and closed his eyes, something he hadn't done in a long time. He tried to remember why he started martial arts in the first place. When he was young, he had been a shy kid who wanted to feel stronger. His first sensei had taught him that fighting wasn't about hurting others. It was about protecting yourself and finding inner balance. Back then he had believed it. But somewhere along the way, after trophies and newspaper articles, he had lost that lesson. As he sat there, his assistant walked in, surprised to see him so early. "You're here before everyone," the young man said softly. The master nodded. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. "Yesterday made me think." The assistant smiled a little. "It was quite a day. I still can't believe Chuck Norris came here." The master looked down. "Neither can I. And the worst part is I didn't treat him with respect. I was rude and he still showed me kindness. That's real strength." The assistant nodded, relieved to hear those words. "Maybe he'll come again," he said. The master didn't answer. Deep down, he hoped he would. He felt like he needed to say something, not as a proud fighter, but as a student who wanted to learn again. Later that afternoon, when the dojo opened for regular classes, the energy inside felt different. The students were still talking about what they had seen. Some couldn't stop smiling. Others looked inspired. A few even said they felt honored to have witnessed the moment. One of the younger boys asked, "Sensei, will Chuck Norris come back?" The master smiled faintly. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But if he does, we'll welcome him with respect." The boy grinned. He was amazing. He didn't even look like he was trying. The master nodded. That's what true control looks like. For the rest of the class, he taught differently. He didn't shout or boast. He spoke softly, explaining each move carefully, reminding everyone that martial arts were not just about power. They were about peace, focus, and self-respect. The students noticed the change. For the first time in months, their teacher seemed calm, almost humble. By the end of the evening, when everyone left, he sat again on the mat. He knew he had to do one more thing: reach out to Chuck. He didn't have his number, but the older man at the diner, the one who had served in the military, had connections. The master drove to the diner where the man was sitting at his usual corner booth. The old man looked up and smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here this late." The master bowed slightly. "I came to ask for a favor. You said you knew Chuck Norris, right?" The old man nodded slowly. "That's right. Why?" "I need to speak with him," the master said. "Not to challenge him, not to fight, just to apologize." The old man studied him for a long moment, then said, "You really mean that?" "Yes," the master replied. "I let my pride speak instead of my heart. He taught me something in 10 seconds that I couldn't learn in 10 years. The old man smiled. "I'll see what I can do." He made a call that night. A few hours later, the dojo master's phone buzzed. When he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped. It was a message from Chuck himself. It simply said, "Heard you wanted to talk. I'll stop by tomorrow afternoon." The master read it twice, hardly believing it. He felt nervous, not the kind of nervousness before a fight, but the kind that comes before something meaningful. The next day, he cleaned the dojo himself. He wiped the mats, polished the mirrors, and even took down a few of his old posters. He wanted the place to feel simple, honest, like the way it used to be when he first opened it. When Chuck arrived, there were no crowds this time. No reporters, no students, just the two of them. Chuck walked in quietly, wearing the same kind smile as before. "Good to see you again," Chuck said. The master bowed deeply. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for my arrogance, for my words, and for disrespecting you." Chuck nodded. "Apology accepted," he said gently. "But you don't owe me anything. The lesson wasn't about me. It was about you." The master looked surprised. "About me?" Chuck smiled. "You've spent years proving you're strong. But real martial arts aren't about proving anything. They're about understanding yourself and helping others find their strength too." The master listened quietly. The words struck deep. Chuck continued, "When you mocked me, I didn't get angry. Because I knew where it came from, ego. We all have it. The challenge is learning when to let it go." The master took a deep breath. "I want to learn that. I want to be better, not just for me, but for my students." Chuck nodded approvingly. "Then you're already on the right path. The first step is realizing that you don't have to be the best. You just have to be true to what you teach." They talked for a long time, about training, philosophy, and life. Chuck told stories of his early days, how he had faced defeat, failure, and pain before finding real strength and humility. The master listened like a student again, absorbing every word. Before leaving, Chuck looked around the dojo and said, You've built something good here. Don't let pride destroy it. Let respect guide it. The master bowed again. I won't forget, Chuck smiled. Good. Maybe one day I'll come back and see how you're doing. When he left, the dojo felt lighter, almost brighter. The master stood there for a while, feeling both humbled and grateful. That night, he called his students for a special meeting. They gathered around, curious about what was happening. He spoke from his heart. Yesterday, I met someone who reminded me what martial arts truly mean. I've been too focused on winning, too focused on showing off. That's not what being a martial artist is about. From now on, we'll train with respect, not ego. Every move you make should come from your heart, not from pride. The students listened quietly. Some smiled, some nodded. They could see that their teacher meant every word. Then he added, "We will honor everyone who walks into this dojo, no matter their skill, age, or background. Every person can teach us something." The room filled with a new kind of energy, calm, focused, real. It wasn't about competition anymore. It was about growth. Over the next few weeks, the dojo changed. The classes became friendlier. The master encouraged his students to help one another, not just to compete. Parents noticed their children smiling more. Adults said they felt more balanced. One afternoon, as class ended, the master looked at the photo on the wall, the one of him holding a trophy years ago. He smiled, then quietly took it down. In its place, he hung a simple quote written on white paper. "True strength is gentle. True power is humble." Every person who entered the dojo after that noticed the change, not just in the room, but in the man who ran it. He still trained hard, still pushed himself, but his eyes were softer, and his voice carried more kindness than pride. He no longer boasted about being unbeatable. Instead, he said, "Every day I learn something new. Even masters must remain students." And somewhere far away, Chuck Norris heard about the transformation and smiled. He had known it all along, that a few seconds of truth can change a lifetime of pride. The dojo master didn't need another lesson to understand. The real fight wasn't between him and anyone else. It was between his ego and his heart. And for the first time in many years, his heart finally won. A few months passed since Chuck's quiet visit to the dojo. The days slipped by gently, and life inside the dojo found a new rhythm. The students noticed the difference in their teacher. He smiled more often, spoke calmly, and no longer shouted when someone made a mistake. He focused on patience and control, and that made everyone more confident. Word spread about how the once proud dojo master had changed. Parents began bringing their kids again. Adults who had stopped coming returned, saying they felt something different in the air. The dojo didn't just feel like a place to learn kicks and punches anymore. It felt like a community, a family built on trust. Every morning, the master opened the dojo early, rolled out the mats himself, and began his quiet warm-up. He practiced slow, controlled moves, breathing deeply with each motion. It wasn't about showing power anymore. It was about balance. When students arrived, they would often find him in silence, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. That calmness spread through everyone. One afternoon, while the class was in session, the door opened quietly. The students were practicing forms, and the sound of steady footsteps caught everyone's attention. When they looked up, there stood Chuck Norris again. The same calm smile, the same relaxed posture. The whole room froze for a second, then erupted in soft gasps. The master's eyes widened, but this time he didn't panic. He walked over quickly and bowed deeply. "Welcome back," he said warmly. Chuck smiled and returned the bow. "I told you I might visit again," he said. "I was nearby and thought I'd see how you're doing." The master grinned. "You came at the right time. We were just finishing our session. Would you like to join us?" Chuck looked around at the curious faces. "Only if you and your students don't mind," the students whispered excitedly. No one could believe they were about to train with Chuck Norris. The master clapped his hands. "Everyone gather around. Today we have an honored guest. And I want you to remember something. Greatness isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can inspire others. Mr. Norris has shown me that." The students bowed to Chuck respectfully. He smiled and nodded back. "Let's have some fun," he said kindly. They began with simple drills. Chuck helped demonstrate how to move with precision instead of force. His movements were smooth, almost effortless. He showed them how small adjustments in balance could make a big difference. The students watched, amazed by how little effort he seemed to use and yet how effective his movements were. When he moved, it was like water flowing, calm, graceful, and controlled. The dojo fell silent as everyone watched. Even the master, who had been training for years, found himself learning new things. At one point, Chuck turned to the class and said, "When I was young, I used to think fighting was about who could punch faster or kick harder. But I learned that true mastery comes when you don't need to fight at all. When your presence is calm enough that conflict dissolves before it starts." The students listened quietly, hanging on every word. His voice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, steady, and full of meaning. Then Chuck turned to the master. "Would you like to do a short demonstration with me? Something to show your students how two people can learn from each other?" The master nodded. "It would be my honor." They stepped to the center of the mat. The air inside the dojo grew still. Everyone leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. They bowed to each other with deep respect. There was no pride, no ego, just mutual understanding. The master took his stance, focused and balanced. Chuck smiled softly, raising his hands in a calm, defensive position. The master moved first, throwing a light jab toward Chuck's shoulder, slow and controlled. Chuck shifted his weight, deflecting it with minimal effort. Then with a gentle motion, he guided the master's arm away and countered with a soft tap to his chest, barely touching him. It wasn't an attack, it was a lesson. The master smiled. "Still as quick as ever," he said. Chuck chuckled. "It's not about speed. It's about timing." They continued, moving like dancers, flowing, balanced, reading each other's energy. There was no tension, only rhythm. The audience could feel the respect between them, like two old friends sharing something sacred. At one point, Chuck stopped and said to the class, "See how your sensei doesn't resist? That's the secret. In life, when you meet resistance, you can either fight against it or move with it. Moving with it takes wisdom." The master nodded in agreement. "Before, I would have tried to overpower him. Now I understand, power isn't always strength. Sometimes it's calmness." Everyone in the room clapped softly, not because it was a show, but because they understood they were witnessing something rare. Humility meeting wisdom. After the demonstration, Chuck sat with the students and answered their questions. Some asked about his training, others about discipline and motivation. He listened carefully to each one, never rushing, always answering with care. A little girl raised her hand and asked shyly, "How can I be strong like you?" Chuck smiled kindly. "Strength isn't in your muscles," he said. "It's in your choices. When you're kind to someone who isn't kind to you, that's real strength. When you keep trying even when you fail, that's strength. Muscles fade, but good character lasts forever." The dojo grew quiet. Everyone absorbed the words deeply. Even the master felt something move inside him. As the session ended, Chuck stood and looked at the master. "You've built something special here," he said. "You've found your balance again." The master bowed. "Thanks to you. Your visit changed everything." Chuck smiled. "No, you changed because you were ready to listen. That's the hardest part for most people." They shook hands, a simple gesture, but one that carried deep meaning. The students cheered softly, not out of excitement, but respect. Before leaving, Chuck turned to the class and said, "Remember, the greatest fight you'll ever face isn't with another person, it's with yourself. Win that and you'll never lose again." Those words echoed in the dojo long after he left. The students talked about it for days. The master printed the quote and placed it on the wall right next to the one that said, "True strength is gentle, true power is humble." That night, when everyone was gone, the master stood alone again in the middle of the mat. The quiet hum of the city outside mixed with the faint echo of Chuck's words in his head. He smiled to himself, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. He realized something simple but profound, that his journey wasn't about becoming the best fighter in the world. It was about becoming the best version of himself. In the following weeks, his dojo gained attention once again, but this time for the right reasons. A local newspaper ran a story titled, "The Humble Dojo That Found Its Heart Again." They wrote about how the teacher had turned pride into purpose, and how his students now trained not for trophies, but for growth. People from nearby towns came to visit, curious about the change. Some even said the energy inside felt peaceful the moment they walked in. The master greeted everyone the same way, with a bow and a smile. He never bragged about meeting Chuck Norris. He rarely even mentioned his name. Instead, he talked about the lessons he had learned, about respect, discipline, and inner peace. One evening, While locking up the dojo, he noticed something shining under the last bit of sunset light, the reflection of the quote on the wall. He stood there for a long time looking at it, then whispered quietly to himself, "Thank you." He didn't know if Chuck would ever return again, but he didn't need him to. The lesson was complete. Every now and then he'd see his students training with focus and kindness, helping each other, laughing between drills, and that was enough. That was victory. Because what happened in that dojo wasn't just about martial arts anymore. It was about learning that even the strongest person can grow stronger by becoming gentle. And somewhere out there, Chuck Norris probably smiled again, knowing that a proud man had found his humility, a dojo had found its soul, and a community had rediscovered what true respect really means. Weeks passed peacefully after Chuck's visit. The dojo became a warm, welcoming place where everyone felt like family. The students had grown close to each other, helping and encouraging instead of competing. The once proud master now carried himself with calmness that inspired everyone who stepped through the doors. He no longer tried to prove anything to anyone, not even to himself. But sometimes life has a way of testing what we've learned, just to make sure we truly understand it. And that test came when the city announced its annual martial arts exhibition, a large public event where different dojos from around the state came together to perform and showcase their skills. It wasn't a competition, but still it carried pride, reputation, and excitement. The master's students were eager to take part. They came to him one evening after class, faces bright with enthusiasm. "Sensei, we want to perform this year," one of the students said. "You've taught us so much. It's time to show people what we've learned." The master hesitated. He had avoided events like that since his change. He didn't want to go back to the old version of himself, the one who showed off just to be admired. But as he looked into his students' hopeful eyes, he saw something different. They weren't chasing fame. They just wanted to share their growth to make him proud. He smiled softly. "All right," he said. "If we go to share, not to show off. Deal?" They nodded eagerly. "Deal!" Over the next few weeks, they prepared together. Instead of creating flashy routines filled with shouting and breaking boards, they focused on smooth, respectful movements, balance, flow, and teamwork. Every class was filled with laughter, mistakes, corrections, and progress. The master guided them with patience. He made sure everyone understood that it wasn't about winning hearts through power, but through sincerity. "When you move," he told them, "let your spirit speak louder than your kicks." The day of the exhibition finally came. The city gymnasium buzzed with excitement. Dojos from all over arrived with colorful uniforms, banners, and music. The air was full of cheers, camera flashes, and the smell of sports mats and energy drinks. When the master and his students entered, some of the other instructors recognized him. They remembered his old reputation, the proud man who once claimed he could beat anyone, even Chuck Norris. A few whispered and chuckled. "Look who decided to show his face again," one man muttered. "I wonder if he's still full of himself?" The master overheard but didn't respond. He simply bowed politely and continued walking with his students. His calmness made them feel safe. Their performance slot was in the afternoon, so they sat together in the stands to watch others. Some dojos performed loud, dramatic routines. Others showcased powerful breaking demonstrations. The audience clapped and cheered for every high kick and flying spin. One of the students leaned toward the master and whispered, "Sensei, what if people find our performance too simple?" The master smiled gently. "Simple things often touch the heart more deeply than loud ones. Trust your training. We're not here to impress. We're here to express." When their turn came, the announcer called their dojo's name. The crowd grew quiet. The students lined up neatly on the mat, their white uniforms crisp. Their eyes focused. The master stepped to the front, bowed to the audience, and said softly into the microphone, "Today we perform not to prove our power, but to show our peace." The crowd didn't quite know what to expect. Then the drums began, slow and steady. The students moved in harmony, every step precise, every motion controlled. There were no shouts, no aggressive strikes. Their movements flowed like water, strong, calm, and connected. In the middle of the performance, the master joined them. Together they formed a circle, each taking turns performing a gentle sequence, passing the energy around like a ripple. The audience watched silently, drawn into the rhythm. When it ended, the dojo bowed together. For a moment the room was quiet. Then slowly applause began, and soft at first, then louder. It wasn't the wild cheer of excitement. It was something deeper. The sound of respect. The master felt warmth rise in his chest. His students smiled proudly, some even teared up. They had done it. After the show, people approached them to compliment their performance. One older instructor said, "I've been in martial arts for 40 years, and that was the most peaceful, meaningful demonstration I've seen." "Thank you." The master bowed humbly. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. As the crowd dispersed, a man approached from behind the curtain. When the master turned, he froze for a moment. It was Chuck Norris again. Chuck smiled warmly. "That was beautiful," he said. "I saw the whole thing." The master blinked in surprise. "You were here?" Chuck nodded. "I come to this exhibition every year quietly. I like seeing how martial arts grows in different communities. But today, I saw something special." The master's students were speechless. They bowed quickly, whispering in awe. Chuck continued, "You've come a long way since the first time we met. What you showed out there, that's what martial arts is really about. You didn't just show technique. You showed heart." The master bowed deeply. "Your words mean a lot to us," he said sincerely. Chuck smiled. "Keep teaching that way. The world needs more teachers who build character, not just fighters." They shook hands once again, just like before, a symbol of friendship and respect. The master's students gathered around, and Chuck took a group photo with them. Everyone grinned like children meeting their hero. As the evening went on, the master noticed something. The other instructors who once mocked him now looked at him differently. Some even came over to shake his hand. One said quietly, "You've changed." "It's good to see," the master smiled. "Change is part of growth. It's never too late to find a better way." When the event ended, the dojo team walked out together under the night sky. The students carried their gear, laughing and talking about the day. The master walked behind them, feeling a quiet happiness he hadn't felt in years. As they reached the parking lot, one of the students said, "Sensei, you looked so calm out there. Were you nervous?" He chuckled softly. "Not at all. I wasn't performing. I was just being myself." That night, back at the dojo, the master placed the group photo on the wall. It showed everyone smiling with Chuck in the middle. Underneath, he wrote a simple line on a small card: "Peace is the highest form of strength." Over the next few days, messages poured in from people who had seen their performance. Some said it inspired them to start training. Others said it reminded them that martial arts isn't just about fighting. It's about self-control and kindness. The master felt grateful. Every message reminded him how far he'd come, from arrogance to awareness, from pride to peace. But deep inside, he also knew this journey wasn't over. Every day would still bring moments that tested his patience, his humility, and his heart. Yet this time he was ready. He continued teaching with love. He guided every new student gently, making sure they understood the importance of respect. He no longer cared about medals or trophies. His reward was seeing his students grow stronger, wiser, and kinder. Sometimes he would look at the photo of Chuck on the wall and smile quietly. The man who once humbled him had also awakened something greater in him. The understanding that true greatness isn't loud. It's quiet. Months later, when a local TV channel made a short documentary about martial arts schools in the area, they featured his dojo. The reporter asked him, "What's the most important thing you teach your students?" He thought for a moment, then said softly, "To win without fighting, to be strong without pride, and to be humble without fear." The interviewer nodded, smiling. The camera captured his words, his calm face, and the sound of students practicing in the background. When the piece aired, people across the community watched it. Many who had once laughed at him now respected him deeply. The dojo became a symbol, not of strength, but of spirit. And in the quiet moments, when the last student had gone home and the lights were low, the master would sit alone on the mat, close his eyes, and whisper the same words every time. "Thank you for teaching me that losing my pride was the best victory I ever had." Years passed, and time became the dojo's quiet teacher. The once small building that had seen so many lessons of pride and humility now stood as a place of peace for everyone who entered. The master had grown older, but there was something deeper in his presence now, a calm energy that made people feel safe and understood. His hair had turned more silver, his movements slower, but his spirit remained sharp as ever. The students who once trained under him as beginners had now become teachers themselves. Some had opened their own dojos, some taught children in schools, and some carried the lessons into their daily lives. But no matter how far they went, they always returned to visit their old master, to sit with him, bow and thank him for the wisdom he had shared. Every evening, after classes ended, he would sit alone for a while on the wooden floor, watching the last rays of sunlight slide through the dojo windows. He liked that quiet time. It reminded him how far life had brought him, from being the arrogant fighter who wanted to prove himself, to becoming someone who finally understood that strength without kindness meant nothing. One summer afternoon, while he was cleaning the mats, a letter arrived. It was thick, sealed with a golden stamp. He opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation to the National Martial Arts Hall of Honor, where masters from all over the country were recognized for their lifetime contribution to the art. He read it twice. His heart felt still. He hadn't expected anything like that. He wasn't the kind of man who sought awards anymore. But as he read further, he noticed something at the bottom. A short message written by hand. Your journey has inspired many. You taught us that martial arts is more than combat. Please join us and share your story. He smiled softly and placed the letter on his desk. That night he sat for a long time, thinking. He thought of the younger version of himself, the proud man who would have seen this as a chance to boast. But now it felt different. This wasn't about being recognized. It was about being grateful for the path he had walked. The ceremony was held 2 weeks later in a large hall filled with banners, lights, and guests. Dozens of martial arts masters were there, dressed in formal uniforms. Cameras flashed as people greeted one another, sharing stories and laughter. When the master entered, some recognized him immediately. They greeted him warmly. It's good to see you, one of the senior instructors said. You've been an example for all of us. He bowed humbly. Thank you, he replied with his gentle smile. As the ceremony went on, several masters were honored for their achievements, championships, schools, international recognition. Then when his name was called, the room grew quiet. The announcer's voice carried through the speakers. This award is presented to a man who once walked the road of pride, but found the path to peace. His story reminds us that true strength lies in humility. Please welcome our honored master. He stepped onto the stage, the sound of applause filling the hall. Standing under the lights, he felt no pride, no excitement, only gratitude. The host handed him a small golden plaque engraved with his name. Then they handed him the microphone. He looked at the audience, hundreds of students, teachers, and families, and took a breath. When I started training, he began, I thought martial arts was about being stronger than others. I thought victory was measured in how many people you could defeat. He paused, his voice steady. But life taught me otherwise. It showed me that pride blinds the heart, and that real power comes from helping others, not hurting them. A wise man once helped me see that, a man I will always respect. He didn't need to say Chuck Norris's name. Everyone knew. The audience clapped, and a few even stood in respect. He smiled softly and continued. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The person you fight the most in life is yourself. And when you win that battle, you never need to prove anything again. The hall erupted with applause. People stood clapping, cheering, not because of his fame, but because of his truth. His words had reached their hearts. After the ceremony, several younger instructors came up to him. One of them said, Your story changed how I teach my students. I used to push them to be the best, but now I teach them to be kind first. The master placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you're already the best kind of teacher, he said with a smile. That night, as he walked out of the hall, the cool air touched his face. The stars above seemed brighter than usual. He held the plaque in his hand for a moment, then looked at it quietly. After a while, he chuckled softly to himself and whispered, This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who believed I could change. Back at his dojo, he didn't hang the plaque on the wall. Instead, he placed it inside a wooden box and put it under his desk. What he cared about most was not what people saw, but what they felt when they came to learn. Days turned into months again. The master continued teaching, though he had slowed down physically. He let his senior students lead most of the classes while he guided them gently, correcting stances, adjusting forms, and telling stories from his life.